Welcome to the National at ADIPEC for the second day. Thank you for joining us on your social media platform. We're covering the latest from the oil and gas global conference. With me today, I'm very happy to say, is Robin Mills, the CEO of Qamar Energy. Robin's also a contributor to the National. He has a weekly column as well as a weekly newsletter that you can sign up for at thenationalnews.com. Robin, welcome.
Thank you, Mustafa.
It's good to have you here. I'd love to get your thoughts on sort of the first 24, 36 hours of ADIPEC and what you've seen.
Well, I think there's a few interesting things here. One is what you can get from the people walking by behind us. It's very busy. Now, maybe it's not on the same scale as immediately pre-pandemic, not surprising, but I think it's impressive just how many people have chosen to travel here and how keen people are to be here. That's I think, very encouraging. So partly this is people, they want to be back on the road, they want to be out meeting their customers and their business partners and so on. It's also a reflection of an energy industry that oil and gas prices are pretty high right now. The mood is quite buoyant. In terms of the topics, I think it's very interesting. So this is an oil and gas conference, one of the world's biggest, if not the biggest. And in past years, the focus would very much be on oil and gas. And you would see, the alternative energies and the new energy forms, occupying 5% of the discussion. This time, very much different, and I would say a huge amount of interest around hydrogen, and a lot of interest around carbon capture and storage and carbon management, and that is taking up, 30, 40, even 50% of the discussion. So that I think is also very interesting. That very sharp change in tone and topic, partly because we're leading on from the pandemic, of course, and Green New Deals and so on, partly because we're leading on from COP26 in Glasgow, the big climate talks, so they're just wrapping up. But that shift of topic is very notable to me too.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you say about hydrogen now being a really important part of the conversation, because it was clear from the tone and the messages that they're not going to stop producing oil and gas all of a sudden because everybody agrees on the path to net zero. Now that may be disappointing to some people, but equally to a huge industry that feels it can't unplug when, as you were saying, there's so much demand at the moment and prices are so high. And actually that's an illustration of what the transition might look like if we don't manage things properly. But from your point of view, is this a circle that can be squared in terms of continuing production of oil and gas while at the same time pushing for net zero?
It's a circle that has to be squared. It's a huge challenge, it's kind of the challenge that the energy industry is facing right now, but it's one that has to be faced. Because, we know we need to get to net zero, but net zero is not about stopping oil and gas production and use, but it's about reducing net emissions to zero. And that's something different, and by the use of carbon capture and storage and hydrogen, we can still continue using oil and gas to a large extent, but in an environmentally responsible way that doesn't involve emissions. That's an important part of it. But when we talk about the transition, we're seeing at the moment a little taste of what a disorderly transition could look like. In Europe we have got record gas prices, record electricity prices, record in East Asia, record coal prices. There are genuine worries about shortages of gas in particular. Oil prices are not at record levels, but they're also fairly high. And I think we'll see if we were to go into transition like this in a disorderly way, in which there is too much focus on the supply side of energy, not enough on the demand side, by which I mean we get rid of oil and gas, but we don't properly put the alternatives in place to meet them, then we will see high prices, energy shortages, and at some point there'll be a social reaction against that, and it will make it hard to carry through the energy transition if people's image of the energy transition is this is us being cold, in the dark, and unemployed. That is a serious risk.
I mean, I get the feeling from the things I've heard here at ADIPEC that across the region, it's not just about the UAE. There is really momentum to meet the goals of climate action, to get to net zero. But it's not an even landscape at the moment, depending on which part of Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia you're in. And so there are different priorities depending on where you are. But ultimately, it seems there is momentum, there is sentiment. Do you think that as a whole, that the region can kind of make it happen?
Look, I think the energy transition and countries' position on it is patchy across the whole world, right? Between big global regions, but also even within regions. Even within Europe, you've got some countries like the UK, which are quite well advanced on the transition, and others, perhaps in Eastern Europe, that are still very dependent on coal. So that's patchy everywhere. The Middle East region, yeah, certainly. So you've got the UAE has a net zero commitment by 2050. Saudi Arabia and Bahrain have a net zero commitment by 2060. Those are the only ones so far. Others may join them. But you've got other countries, of course, that have been struggling with economic problems, crises, insecurity, conflict, and so on. Of course, it's been harder for them to focus on energy transition issues when they're really just focusing on making it to the next month and the next year. But we have seen some very, very encouraging moves, and I think some of the regional leaders have played an important role by showing what is possible and what is even successful and attractive, and other countries are now latching onto that. So, for example, Kuwait has now revisited its renewable plans. It's now looking at another, and now again at another large renewable energy project. Oman has done pretty well in renewable energy the past couple of years. It is now taking forward a couple of very large, interesting international hydrogen projects with some pretty serious backers. Iraq struggles with shortages of gas and power, but Iraq has about 7 gigawatts of solar power projects that are being seriously discussed. That is, it's a long road to go to make those reality, but at least the direction of travel is a lot more encouraging than a year or two ago.
So there's hydrogen, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen. So green hydrogen is produced from solar energy, clean energy, blue hydrogen from natural gas. There is some understanding that somehow, excuse me, that the green hydrogen is preferable. However, in the transition, blue hydrogen is very important as well.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. So, hydrogen is hydrogen, right? It's a molecule with 2 hydrogen atoms. It's all the same. How you make it, of course, as you say, is different whether it's green or blue. The key thing in the short term, I think, for hydrogen to be successful, it has to bring down its costs and it has to scale up. So at the moment, hydrogen is a relatively expensive energy carrier. How do we scale that up? So we need to build hydrogen production capacity, but also the capacity to transform hydrogen to other useful energy forms and materials, and to move hydrogen around the world, so to export hydrogen from an area like the Middle East, which may be a producer of hydrogen, to Japan, South Korea, Europe, other importing areas. And in that scale up, the blue hydrogen is really critical, because blue hydrogen, it's derived from natural gas. There's already a very large natural gas industry. It's something that can scale up relatively quickly. Green hydrogen is, by some measures, cleaner. I think some groups would see it as more desirable in the long term, but it'll do much better if it can ride on the success of a growing hydrogen industry that has already built up that critical mass.
There's another technology that you've written about in the National, which is about taking carbon out of the air. What's the prognosis on that technology?
Well, over the past 200 years of the Industrial Revolution, we put a lot of carbon dioxide into the air. Now we realise that's a problem, and it's not just about stopping emissions into the atmosphere, and those emissions will continue. Even if we get to net zero, they will continue until 2050 and beyond. But it's also about taking that carbon dioxide out. And when we talk about net zero, that doesn't mean we stop emitting. It just means that anything we put into the air, we balance by taking CO2 out. Some of that will be by biological methods, like forestry, for example, reforestation and so on. But if you look at the land area you'd have to plant with trees to make a significant dent, there is not that much land available. So technological methods, direct air capture, taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and putting it away safely underground will be absolutely critical. Now, at the moment, that is only done on a very small scale. There's a project in Iceland, there's a project in Switzerland. These are early stage technologies, but the technology itself is relatively simple. The problem at the moment, it's at a small scale and it's too costly. However, we know that from the path that we've followed on wind and solar power over the past couple of decades, if these things get sufficient support, they scale up, manufacturing industry comes in, then the cost of direct air capture can drop dramatically, and it can become very viable and another key tool in our climate toolbox.
So by mid-century, whether it's hydrogen, direct air capture, carbon capture, it's going to look very, very different, and we may be very close to meeting our path to net zero, or getting on that path to net zero. Robin Mills, CEO of Kamara Energy, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Please do sign up to The Energy this week at thenationalnews.com, and thank you for joining us.